أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin, as always, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. The Muslim women's movement today is experiencing a critical mass. More than any other time in history, Muslim women participate in the radical changes of our lives in formulating the basic paradigms upon which our lives are measured. What I will discuss with you here today has happened all in my lifetime alone. There have been more radical considerations of the possibilities of how to live as Muslim women in our time than at any other time. I want to say, except at the time of the advent of Islam, but the aspect about which I will speak cannot even be said about the nascent community of Islam 14 centuries ago. This distinction is important. There was a radical shift in worldview and praxis with the transformation of Islam. Certain rights were given to women that had not existed anywhere in the world, like a woman's right to own property, a woman's right to choose her husband, a woman's right to learn and to receive education, a woman's right to inherit, a woman's right to divorce her husband for as little as failure to satisfy her sexually, a woman's right to act as a witness in a court of law. But while these were tremendous benefits for women, transforming their lives neck and neck with the transformation in the lives of men, if not more so given the abysmal status of women before revelation or at the time of Islamic beginnings, of course, however, we should note, women were not themselves the catalyst of these changes or the agents of change. They were beneficiaries of the divine revelation to the prophet, who both articulated the message of the Quran as revealed to him and embodied it. What marks our present time and the new millennium exceptional is the critical mass of Muslim women engaged in the struggle for the realization of the political implementation of their own self-determination. Maybe some of you are stuck in the old paradigm, you know, the one that ascribes to Muslims a single role, that of the helpless victim waiting to be saved from her own culture and liberated from her own religion? I certainly hope not. In the past few decades, we witnessed Muslim women engaged at every level of the community, in every community, even in the most remote village, within the arenas of education, law, science, politics, family, economics, environment, spirituality, and art. Wherever there are Muslims and women in the world, Muslim women have become the agents of change and human dignity. Despite this critical mass of transformation, of course, all women do not go about this change in the same way. Sometimes there is great contradiction and discord. This is natural and in many ways necessary. That is, unless, of course, we are unaware of or insensitive to the diversities, and then become subject to programs of divide and conquer, instead of seeing how our various strategies lend themselves towards the completion of similar goals, human dignity and honor, we are pitted against each other to determine who amongst us is right or has the right to decide for others amongst us exactly what is the nature of the Muslim women's agenda and what are the strategic methods for change and transformation. Those of us engaged in the discourse and activism are fond of pointing out that Muslim women are not a monolith. Still, it is interesting to note we aspire to a utopian unity of reform, looking for a monolithic solution or a single uniform strategy. This presentation is about the diversity of strategic approaches to gender reform. I have worked on gender issues before I would own the word feminism as appropriate for my scholarship, activism, and identity. I persist with my aim to make certain articulations towards gender equality within the faith or from a faith perspective. I was born in the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. My father, a Methodist minister, took me to the March on Washington with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963 when I was 11 years old. There has never been a separation between ideas of God and the fight against oppression, no matter in what form the oppression takes or who it is against. Every discussion about Islam and women begins with the meaning of the word Islam. People often operate on the presumption that there is a uniform agreement on the meaning of the word Islam. So when people say, for example, Islam means peace, or Islam prohibits homosexuality, or in Islam you must wear hijab, or Islam is a violent religion, the source of such abstractions is frequently not provided. One important development that the women's movement helped to forge in international debates at the beginning of the new millennium was the distinction between Muslim cultures and Islamic primary sources, that is, the Quran, the established Sunnah, the authentic ahadith, and sometimes Islamic law, which is somewhere between understandings of the term Sharia and fiqh. I begin with the definition of Islam encapsulated by its most basic and fundamental principle, Tawheed. At the most fundamental level, it refers to God as one. For matters of social justice, it refers to the more intensified form of its syntactical origin, the making of one from fragments, diversity or plurality, which could be defined as unity. This social principle of Tawheed mandates a relationship between human beings only of equality and reciprocity. The role of women in Islam is to be Khalifa on the earth, a moral agent of Allah within the sacred order of balance and harmony in the universe. This teleology is confirmed by the Quranic passage, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. Indeed, I will create an agent on the earth. Woman was not created as a byproduct of, helpmate for, or second-class citizen to man. Furthermore, her agency is in a direct relationship to God, unmitigated by men's agency, family, or culture. This agency is to be manifest by actions fil ard, in the creation, on the earth, standing up for justice and gender equality, working to reform asymmetrical gender policies, and toppling tyrannical practices and epistemologies are thus essential to an agent as part of the divine human relationship. These aspects of justice are all mandated by Allah and established by the prophetic Sunnah. Coincidentally, this is the same as the role of men in Islam. Women are human. They do not depend upon men for their humanity. It is given to them by Allah. While women have always been a part of the community, expected to conform to the development of Islam within that community, in the early development of the foundational paradigms of Islamic thought and practice, they did not enjoy equal participation in establishing the fundamental understanding of what is Islam. In fact, as the Muslim empire spread geographically and politically after the Abbasid period, women's contributions to the fundamental canon of Islam were further marginalized and ultimately silenced. This had a profound effect on the future of Islamic thought and the establishment of both legitimacy and authority. If we look back over Islamic history from our vantage point, we see a very minor role that women played in establishing the basic epistemology that would come to stand as authority and legitimacy. Today, women are present and accounted for at every level of the community, not the least of which is the scholarly and ritual community. Women work to make sure we contribute to the establishment of precedent for later communities in Islam. We participate fully in establishing new canon, constructing new traditions, forming new policies, living in the present with an eye on the past and a conscious trajectory towards the future. This is a corrective to the asymmetry between women and men in Muslim communities in the past. However, we do not go about this without some contention between our voices, perspectives, methods, and objectives. This is natural, inevitable, and for the most part, useful. Despite evidence of certain exceptional voices against gender inequality throughout Muslim history, today we experience a mass movement of women and men against gender asymmetry as injustice. It matters very little if this injustice was established by intent or by accident of discrimination. The modern Muslim women's movement is connected to certain global developments. I'm going to paraphrase some of this, but one of the developments, of course, is the end of colonialism. What's interesting about the enterprise for the end of colonialism is that women and men stood side by side in order to achieve independence and the establishment of the nation state. But when the independence was won, they were not full beneficiaries of the policies that were then put into place. They were basically told to go back home and make bread. I became aware of a major rift between Muslim women's perspectives when I was at the Beijing World Conference for Women in 1995. There were more Muslim women present at that meeting than any of the previous UN meetings and also any of the subsequent UN meetings. So taking advantage of this opportunity, they thought, well, let's come together and form a Muslim Women's Caucus. A nightly meeting was called between those Muslim women present at Beijing would turn into chaos. It was impossible to find any common ground between two dominant but contending voices. And for some reason, the representatives of those voices found themselves unable to decide on an agenda between them with regard to those whom they represent and with regard to their own presence. One voice I will call Muslim secular feminists. And this is because they seek to remove religion from the debates. Religion, they would propose, is irreconcilably patriarchal. Islam is patriarchal. There's no way forward for women except to adopt the standards proposed by the UN and keep religion out of it. If a woman wishes to recognize her religion, that is personal, but is not a matter of policy. Otherwise, it could hamper the progress being proposed on her behalf. Of course, this position is unacceptable to Muslim women who feel a strong connection to their identity as Muslims, even though it articulates the response that is felt by Muslims to the sting of colonialist movements and the attempt of the new imperialism to articulate what is understood as universal. The other voice at Beijing is the voice of the Islamist movement. They likewise asserted that you cannot have both Islam and human rights. If there must be a choice, then they held the authoritative, indigenous, and culturally more authentic voice, the voice of Islam. For them, although Islam did not align itself with modern notions of gender equality, the gender complementarity that it did offer was superior, and all we needed to do was to see the wisdom behind it. There was literally some people who went around with a little booklet, The Wisdom Behind Islam's Perspective on Gender. A third voice was also present at the conference, but it was in its nascent stage with no clear methodology or implementable strategy, let alone a set of objectives. However, they did argue or we did argue, that the either-or binary did not reflect the overwhelming majority of Muslim women. Most Muslim women unquestionably identify with Islam. At the same time, many express concern over experiences of disjuncture between what is promoted as the ideal of Islam and their own lived realities. In the 20th century, these lived realities were increasingly being made public. With so much attention, however, the push to disavow Islam was no doubt confusing, if not also confounding. Further clarification was needed to distinguish the voice of this third agenda from the Islamist agenda because they also refused to disavow Islam. Meanwhile, as this third voice was critiquing certain practices and the underlying patriarchal structures and epistemology in the development of the Islamic canon and of Muslim cultures, they were shunned by the Islamists as being one and the same as secular Muslim feminists. As such, a development of a more nuanced, mediating articulation would go unnoticed for some time. Part of the development of this mediating articulation was to critique the terms Islam and feminism or human rights, to interrogate their relevance to the lives of Muslim women. In fact, the term feminism became a linchpin. It is interesting to note that neither terms, Islam or feminism, was subjected to more dynamic development initially. However, without this interrogation, it is difficult to distinguish the next development of gender discourse and action. The meeting of Islam and feminism was only possible when such an interrogation was followed through. Heretofore, feminism had to be Western, had to be secular. For those who would develop into or were already self-recognized secular feminists, this projection of feminism was unproblematic. Similarly, for the Islamists, this projection was unproblematic because it helped fuel their refusal to adopt the title feminist, no matter what the nature of their scholarship or activism. For a period of time, this reified usage of the term feminist helped to clarify who was who. Equally problematic, however, was the reified usage of the term Islam acceptable to both groups. When both terms were challenged, then the edges of the debate moved forward by leaps and bounds. One of the main contributions of the third voice at Beijing since that meeting was the authentic challenge to the politicization of a neoconservative understanding of Islam. It began with a gender-inclusive analysis of the notion of human being in the Islamic intellectual traditions and primary sources. Fixing upon simple Islamic cosmology articulated in the Quran, the human being is an agent of divine will or khalifa. While this articulation is fundamental in the primary texts and the foundation of the Islamic worldview, its application to women had been curtailed by other functionary relationships. The standard measurement of patriarchy within Muslim historical and cultural contexts limited a woman's agency to God only in as much as it manifests through her agency to men and to family. The agency of a man, however, remained independent or direct to God, even when family relationships could be seen as important. It is the status of the person in the patriarchal family that Muslim personal status law adjudicates. Establishing and maintaining the patriarchal family does not require women's human agency or human rights. It does not even require social justice in the way that we understand it today. The patriarchal family is built upon unequal or complementary relationships. The third voice at Beijing began as a questioning voice. Does this complementarity fulfill the divine purpose on earth or achieve agency, the ultimate obligation of all human beings created by Allah? A woman's service to men or family should never be a trade-off for her service and agency to Allah. However, in the patriarchal family structure, the only one known heretofore within Muslim cultures, challenges to the autonomy of women's agency are seen as good and natural byproducts of her nature. Furthermore, to reject the patriarchal family would have been the same as rejecting to participate in the community or even to participate in Islam. It was not a price the overwhelming majority of Muslim women were willing to pay, so they made their peace with it. There is no doubt that women's roles in Islam are part of current global debates in the new millennium. More importantly, unlike any other time in history, Muslim women themselves are leading these debates. This presentation looks at the difference between three main voices in the debates. What we cannot deny is that Muslim women themselves are taking control over the future of what Islam and gender will look like. At stake is the fundamental understanding of what Islam intends for women as human beings, agents of Allah, and as citizens in the global context. As Muslim women, notions of gender from pre-modern times, which cast women as dependents, needing male benevolence and maintenance, are untenable. However, the ability to counter such ideas by formulating new ones has gained momentum only within an Islamic framework with the kind of work that is done under the banner of Islamic feminism. Islamic feminism works to establish a new egalitarian epistemology of Islam based on its own primary sources and not with the intermediary of patriarchal thinkers or culture. Islamic feminism says Islam belongs to all of us. All of us have a stake, not only in how our religion is defined, but also how religious ideas are implemented in public policies or in our homes. Furthermore, we say notions about women's subservience are the result of certain medieval constructions reflecting the understanding of jurists and philosophers at that time, but they are not divine constructions. We are free to understand divine constructions for ourselves and in our context. When we do this, we unveil a much broader vista of gender possibilities than heretofore practiced or even imagined. In our context, justice, that essential principle inherent in all Islamic texts, must be in accordance to ideas and practices of equality and reciprocity. Today, we are up against the realization about diverse communities and about diversity within our communities. We must propose and construct modes of operation beyond those into which we were born and about which we know on the basis of a radically alternative worldview and epistemology. We are also up against attempts to articulate universal ideas about humankind and human rights. The possibility of participating in these discussions as Muslims actually stems from the kind of work that has shaped Islamic feminist philosophy and theology. This theology is based on an interactive relationship within the production of knowledge in Islam, including knowledge about God or Allah and knowledge about human relationships with God and with each other. The basis of this philosophical perspective is Tawheed. However, Tawheed, as it operates on the metaphysical level, is not limited to Islam or to Muslims. It is simply derived from Islamic sources. At the root level, Tawheed refers to monotheism. However, it is more than merely God is one, especially considering that the origins of the word Tawheed is the second form of the verb, which is emphatic. At the metaphysical level, God is the highest or ultimate reality. This can be depicted by a vertical line up to down, down to up. Human beings are created by Allah and as agents and service of Allah at the lower part of the metaphysical reality, then they have a relationship with each other. Although humans are numerous and in diverse communities, the Quran says, "Shu'uban wa qaba'il," nations and tribes, none is above another in humanness. Therefore, with regard to each other, humans exist only on the horizontal line of reciprocity. The Tawhidic paradigm of reciprocity moves beyond its philosophical or theological framework when put into application in civil society and in the context of global pluralism. No one has greater humanity than another. The means for working out that humanity in civil society have been most highly developed under the new democracies, albeit still imperfectly. These democracies simply adhere to the necessity of people orchestrating the rules of their own realities within the systems that govern. For women and gender, especially in the context of Islam and Muslims, this also requires a fundamental rethinking of family and a restructuring of Muslim personal status law. Although the idea of family as a human, intimate relation is contained, all manifestations of patriarchy and family must be altered towards egalitarian relations. Marriage is not a contract of sale with the woman becoming a commodity of the man. Marriage is a contract of exchange. Both partners become entwined with the other through mutual commitment, fidelity, responsibility, love, and compassion, as the Quran says, mawaddatan wa rahmah. The difference between them biologically will certainly affect the childbearing and child-rearing stages, but only in so much as the biological tasks go. No other aspect of nurturing, developing well-being, and caretaking are limited by or to biology. In the broader context of policy, politics, public ritual, and the home, no role is exclusive to either male or female. The capacity to develop the skills mandated to fulfill any role adheres only to our humanness and not to our biological sex. This is the radical contribution of Islamic feminism. We are not compromising human rights. We are not compromising Islam. We are challenging the fundamental basis of how those rights and how Islam is adjudicated in the law and in public policy, and how they are experienced and practiced in the private spaces of the family and the culture. Towards this goal, both Islamism and secular feminism play a vital role, provided the dichotomy between them is put to the service of the empowerment of women as full agents before Allah and in society. Thank you.